This monstrous story is about how the closest and dearest people can turn out to be traitors. A 17-year-old girl disappeared under strange circumstances after quarreling with her mother and stepfather. At first, it looked as if she had decided to run away from home, but after a detailed investigation, the police found out the truth that will give you goosebumps. 17-year-old Bernadette Walker lived in the English city of Peterborough with her family. After school, she entered a local college and began studying photography. She planned to connect her future life with creativity. Her relatives described her as a shy, but very friendly, positive girl. She had many friends, but most of the time she communicated with them through social networks. Her mother, 37-year-old Sarah, had 9 children. She dated and lived with Scott Walker for a long time. Despite the fact that they were not married, the woman took his surname for herself and her children. In 2018, Sarah and Scott separated. However, they continued to live in the same house. At the same time, Sarah started a new relationship. Scott was Bernadette's stepfather, but she took to calling him father. All this seems very strange, but the family could not be called dysfunctional. At least they did not have a shortage of means of subsistence. On July 17, 2020, Bernadette started at the home of Scott's parents, who essentially replaced her grandparents. The next day, Scott picked her up to take her home. And here something strange began. According to Scott, during the trip, there was an argument between them. When he stopped the car on the side of the road, the girl ran out and disappeared in an unknown direction. Scott hasn't seen her since, according to his own version. On July 21, 3 days after the disappearance, Bernadette's mother contacted the police. The call was made at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sarah reported that she and Scott last saw her on July 18th. Sometime after Bernadette ran out of the car, she texted her mother saying she didn't want to go home and planned to stay with her ex-boyfriend for a while. According to Sarah, this was not the first time her daughter ran away from home, but she always returned. They exchanged several more messages, but on July 20, Bernadette stopped communicating. That day, around 1 a.m., she texted her mother saying she would be home soon. Her older brother decided to contact Bernadette's ex-boyfriend and asked her to tell her to call her mother. However, the young man said that she did not show up at his house and did not even contact him. The mother wrote to several of Bernadette's friends, but they all insisted that the girl was not with them. After this, she decided to contact the police. The operator asked Sarah to give details about the day the girl was last seen. Having heard about the quarrel with Scott in the car, he asked the reasons for this conflict. Sarah admitted that she had a fight with her daughter the day before, which is why she decided to spend the night with Scott's parents. When he came for her, he asked Bernadette to apologize to her mother. However, the girl said that she was not going to return home, got out of the car, and ran away. Scott tried to catch up with her, but couldn't. The operator found this story very strange, but the police found no reason for a serious investigation. Everything looked as if the girl was not in any danger, and she would return home sooner or later. But soon the case was transferred to another detective, and he was seriously alarmed by a very strange set of facts. Police searched Bernadette's home and also spoke with Scott. Within a few days, it became known that the homicide department was interested in this case. During a search of the girl's room, the police found her personal diary, which forced them to look at this case from a completely different angle. Not long before her disappearance, Bernadette wrote that she had quarreled with her mother, and also described the reasons for this quarrel. That day she did not dare to tell her mother the terrible truth. Scott had been molesting and abusing her for the past 7 years. The girl also added that he installed hidden cameras in the bathroom and her bedroom. Bernadette hoped that her mother would help her, but she called her daughter a liar and began to threaten her so that the girl would not dare to go to the police. Because of this argument, Bernadette decided to spend the night at her grandparents' house, and the fact that it was Scott who came to pick her up the next day seemed very strange to the police. The detectives caught up with Scott, and he was not 30, installing cameras in the toilet. However, his acquittal raised even more questions. He allegedly did this because Bernadette was hiding candy wrappers there, and he really wanted to catch her doing it. Of course, the police did not believe this and began to dig deeper. After searching through information about Scott's smartphone, they established another alarming fact. The man's phone was switched off for 90 minutes just after he picked up Bernadette from her parents' house. As soon as his smartphone turned on, Scott called Sarah. The police did not have a recording of the conversation, which lasted 9 minutes, but all of the above was already enough to make a very sad assumption. A very creepy theory emerged before the detectives. Scott could have killed Bernadette right after he took her. For the next 90 minutes, he was able to hide her body, turning off his phone in case the police later got a hold of his location that day. Next, he called Sarah, told about what had happened, and asked for help in covering up the murder of her daughter. Detectives knew that if this theory was true, the girl's mother was guaranteed to know the truth and help him. While the police were working on this creepy version, Sarah and Scott were not sitting idle. The mother called on the public to help find her daughter, distributing and posting leaflets. The stepfather wrote a touching post on social networks, urging Bernadette to get in touch and tell her that she was fine. He also added that the whole family cares and loves her. 7 weeks after Bernadette's disappearance, police announced that the case had been reclassified. Now it passed as a murder without the presence of the victim's body. Such cases are extremely rare, since it is very difficult to prove someone's guilt without a body. However, detectives believed that the girl was no longer alive. Immediately after reclassifying the case, they arrested first Scott and then Sarah. But where did all these messages that Bernadette sent to her friends and mother after her disappearance come from? By that time, the police already had an answer. They tracked the movement of her smartphones and came to the conclusion that since the day of the girl's disappearance, the phone had been in the area of warehouses where storage containers were rented out. After examining the geolocation of Sarah and Scott's smartphones, police determined that they also visited that location multiple times within 2 days of Bernadette's disappearance. This made it look like they were the ones sending the messages from her phone. Another fact supported this version. One of Bernadette's friends, who received messages from her account, shared his suspicions with the police. According to him, the writing style was completely different, and he initially suspected something was wrong. With all the information in hand, the police charged Scott and Sarah with obstruction of justice. Soon, murder charges were also added to the charges against Scott. The man denied his guilt and insisted that the girl really ran away from his car. However, he could not tell the police the exact place where it happened. As for Sarah, she turned out to be much more accommodating. When the detectives laid out the available evidence in front of her and announced the term at which she risked going to prison, the woman began to speak. Sarah admitted that she sent the message from her daughter's phone and accounts. On the day Bernadette disappeared, Scott called her and demanded her help cover his tracks. However, the woman insisted that he did not tell her about the murder. She only said that he threatened her and her new lover with violence if she refused to help. Sarah began to cling to the version that she was helping kill her only out of fear for his own life. At the same time, detectives found out another strange thing. After her daughter disappeared, Sarah searched Google for how to track a cell phone. This showed that she was making serious efforts to hide the truth. Despite the confession, detectives still had no idea where Bernadette's body was. Because Scott had turned off his phone, they couldn't even roughly select a search area. Scott himself, of course, was in no hurry to share this information, because it would confirm his guilt. But he still could not escape punishment. The final court hearing took place on September 10, 2021, and Scott Walker was found guilty of Bernadette's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the right to be released no earlier than after 32 years. It's worth clarifying one point here. There is a law in Britain that prevents a criminal from applying for parole if he is found guilty of murder, but the victim's body has not been found. In other words, Scott can count on getting out of prison only if he names the place where he hid Bernadette's bodies. As for Sarah, she received 6 years in prison for obstruction of justice. This verdict outraged many people because the woman, without a twinge of conscience, covered up the murder of her own daughter. But the court was unable to impose a harsher sentence because they had no evidence to indicate that Sarah actually knew about the murder. This story once again shows that even the closest person can betray in such a monstrous way. It's hard to believe that a mother could do this to her daughter, but there's no escaping the reality. As for Scott, he deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. This cowardly man decided to kill the girl who called him her father, just to hide his dirty deeds.